and welcome to Census 2020, What You Need to Know. This forum, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters ABC in the city of Coon Rapids, will feature an excellent panel of speakers to address the question of what we need to know about the census. My name's Gretchen Sable, and I'm the president of LWV ABC. Our ABC stands for Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area, but we actually serve all of Anoka County, including Fridley and the southern cities and East Bethel, way up there in the north. And we also serve the northern two cities of Hennepin County. So we have a large area that we cover, and we work hard with that. Across the United States, the League of Women Voters is an organization fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. We do not support or oppose political parties or candidates for office. Our shtick is making sure that everybody gets to vote that deserves to vote, and that we all have a fair shake in government through open and transparent government. So that's what we're about. As a nonpartisan organization, League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government. So our program tonight will help people to understand the census and to know what they need to know about the importance and value of the census for our communities. We're delighted to be partnering with the city of Coon Rapids in this, so thank you very much. Coon Rapids has begun the hard work of ensuring a complete count in the 2020 census. Now's a good time for all of us to ask our cities and counties what they're doing to prepare for the census. As we've heard in the news, federal funding for the 2020 census has been lagging since 2012, and costs have risen, meaning that there's going to be less funding flowing from above to help states, cities, and counties do their work. There's so much riding on this census that it's important for all of us, government and community partners alike, to pick up the slack. So we're going to talk some about that, about how community groups can get involved, what cities can do, what counties can do, and what's riding on the importance of the census. But, like any good program, we have some commercials here, so I'm going to tell you about 3 upcoming events in our league that will be in October. The first one on October 2nd, so League of Women Voters does voter education, right? We have candidate forums. And so we have a candidate forum on October 2nd, that's a Wednesday. Candidates for Anoka Hennepin School Board members, Districts 1, 2, and 5, and Ramsey City Council Ward 3. This forum is going to be at 6:30 p.m. at the Sandberg Building, that's old Sandberg Middle School in Anoka. It's on 2nd Street in Anoka. And then on Tuesday, October 8th at 6:30, we have a candidate forum for Anoka County Commissioner. That's the seat that's currently open in District 6, Lino Lakes area. That's going to be at Lino Lakes City Hall at 7497 Lakes Drive, again at 6:30 p.m. So those 2 forums are very important for people that live in these areas, and I would urge you to attend those. And then on Monday, October 14th, we have our regular LWV ABC meeting. We meet on the second Monday. And we're going to be hosting Lori Anderson from Transformative Circle here from Coon Rapids. She's going to come and talk about the work that Transformative Circle's been doing and really help us to understand kind of what goals they had when they started out and see where they've gotten to since that time. And all are welcome to join us. Our programs are taped by QCTV, the cable channel up in Andover, and they're available online for later viewing. LWV envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, and the knowledge and confidence to participate. If you're interested in League, Google League of Women Voters MNABC. Women, men, and young people over 16 can join. All can participate in our meetings and our work, even if you don't join, so thank you. So our 2 speakers that are going to give more detailed presentations are Andrew Verdon. Andrew works with the State Demographer's Office in St. Paul, and he's going to help us understand the big picture of the 2020 census. And then we have Matt Brown, the Economic Development Director for Coon Rapids. He's been our liaison in organizing this meeting, and he's going to also talk about kind of the more local aspects of the census. So I'm just going to let them go at it. Thank you.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Usually volume is not my problem. Thank you very much for coming and coming and doing this tonight. I'm very, very pleased how engaged that the League of Women Voters statewide has been in this project. One can make an argument that the census is in fact even more important than voting. And the reason being is while voting is limited to those who are 18, you have to be a voter, you have to be eligible to vote, you have to be a citizen in order to do it, that the census, what makes the census different is that the census is literally for everyone. and it is, of course, the foundation for voting. And it's the foundation for our political power. It's the foundation for us getting funding, and it's also the backbone of data upon which policy decision makers rely. I've spoken to about a dozen or so chapters around the state, as has my boss, Susan Brower, the state demographer, who some of you may know, or at least from Almanac, you know her, from NPR at least. And yes, she's delightful in person too. In fact, just yesterday, Susan and I were tabling at the League of Women Voters supper celebration in St. Paul. So once again, pleased to be here with friends. So with that, let's get into the meat of the bones here. So I'm Andrew Verdon. I'm the Director of Census Operations and Engagement for the state of Minnesota. I worked for the Census Bureau in 2010, so I know how they work, which is why I'm glad to be doing the thing that I'm doing now, which is not working for the Census Bureau. Although I would encourage you to. Let's talk about the census. It is, as you may know, that it's required by the Constitution. It's taken every 10 years. It's taken place since 1790, this is going to be an interesting census with some interesting challenges for us. As you can see on the screen before you is the 2010 form. The questions are the exact same on the 2020 form as were in 2010, which is good news. If those of you following the news may have heard, there was an attempt to add an 11th question about citizenship. Fortunately, that question was not added. I speak in a nonpartisan fashion when I say that. I work for the demographer, the state demographer of the state of Minnesota, and she says that anything that we do to change the census form that might impact census participation, whether that's adding another comma or changing the order of the questions or adding a question like citizenship, may have a very detrimental effect. So we're very pleased that is the case. You'll see here a sample form from 2010. It starts with, how many people live in this residence? That's the first and most essential question of the form. Other questions include, what's your name? What's your sex? What's your age? Are you Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? What's your race? Are you a renter or do you own your home? I'd make an argument that these questions are not particularly personal. In fact, you could probably fill out my form if you were standing outside of my apartment and you watched as people came and left my apartment. You'd be able to fill out my form for me. This is the good old-fashioned paper form of the census. As I mentioned before, so the citizenship question was introduced in March of last year. It was challenged by multiple states, including Minnesota. It was heard by the Supreme Court in April of this year. The decision was announced by the Supreme Court in late June, and the question was ultimately abandoned in July. Now, that said, there's still a lot of fear around this question. There's still a lot of misunderstanding. There's something to be said for, there's been 15 months of people hearing about there's going to be a citizenship question. Now, whether certain populations might even bother to open their form or say, well, I remember hearing something about a citizenship question. I don't know if I'm going to answer that. In spite of the fact that it's no longer on the form, does not mean that danger is over and all is well, or we're smooth sailing from here on out as far as census is concerned. There are 205 days left until the census. Not that I'm counting. 205 days. Let me see if I can put this in terms that people can really relate to. That's only 30 Taco Tuesdays. 30 Taco Tuesdays. Now, I'm not going to ask anyone in the room to say how many tacos is that between now and Census Day. I can tell you it's well over 100 for me. 205 days. That's not very much until Wednesday, April 1st of 2020. So this is important information to know. Answering the census is safe. And now I will grant you, if you don't trust the government, you don't believe the government when the government says, trust me, it's safe. But it is. And I think it's important for a room like this of civically engaged people to understand, because when people in your circles, be that from your faith community or from your school or from the library or your social circles or what have you, that it's important for you to know the right answer, so when someone asks you what the answer is, that you know what it is. So any information that you provide the census on an individual level cannot be shared with anyone else for any reason. That means the federal government, that means the state government, it means county government, it means city government, it means your landlord, it means your neighbor. No one can know the information that you have put down on your form for a period of 72 years. Does anyone know why 72 years? Life expectancy. Life expectancy. So the 2020 census will not be, the individual information from the 2020 census will not be released till the year 2092. Unless there's some real amazing leaps in medical technology, I will not be around. I will not be around when this information is released. I'm not sure that my 401k could handle that life expectancy for me anyway. So it's important to know that when we're talking about the government, this is the IRS, this is the FBI, this is welfare, this is immigration, this is the Department of Revenue. No one can get this information. And the Census Bureau takes this very, very seriously. People who work for the Census Bureau are sworn to secrecy for life for any information that they are able to obtain, and there's very, very stiff penalties for sharing it. It's 5 years in federal prison and $250,000 fine. I don't care how juicy whatever it is you see as a census enumerator in that particular apartment or house. I guarantee you it's not worth 5 years in federal prison or $250,000 fine. These are jobs which, at the top end of the pay scale, pay about $20 an hour, right? So, $20 an hour, yeah, I think I'll just keep my mouth shut. Census Bureau does a great job of protecting information. You know, while our dear friend Mark Zuckerberg might sell our information, even our dear friends at Target, seems like my information got out when I was just buying some kitty litter. Fact is, the Census Bureau does a very good job of protecting this information. And as I indicated before, the fact is that most of the information on that form is really not that personal. I had to give more information to replace my Verizon phone earlier this afternoon. So there are 3 reasons why the census is important. It comes down to power, it comes down to money, and it comes down to data. When we're talking about power, we're talking about political power. We're talking about power in Washington, D.C., in St. Paul. We're talking about power in the county, and we're talking about power on the city level. We're talking about money. We're talking about money comes from the feds from Washington, D.C., also from St. Paul, also from the county, and the city uses this information to determine how to allocate funds in the city. And lastly, it's about data. You know, I think a common misperception with respect to the census is, well, you know, this is a government program. Well, yeah, I mean, it is. It's a government program. The government are the ones who do the counting, but it's not just the government that relies on this information. Nonprofits use this information to determine where the populations they serve reside. Businesses use it to determine where should we put another Target, where do we put a CVS, where do we put the high-speed bus lines, right? So all this information is very vital. And if we're not counted, then we don't count, to put it very simply. Here's a map of the United States following the 2010 census. The states in gray are those which maintain their congressional seats. Those in, let's call that orange, are those which lost the seat or more. And those in blue are those which gained. What do the states in orange have in common? Where are they located largely? Midwest? North? Cold places, right? Except for our friend down there in Louisiana, that orange 6 down there. Who can think of something that might have happened before the 2010 census which would cause people to leave quickly? Right. Hurricane Katrina. How about the states in blue? What do they have in common? Where are they located? The South, largely. And they're warm. Except for Washington up there, number 10. What's Washington got going on that might be causing people to move there? Technology, right? Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft, right? They got jobs. So there are 435 seats in Congress. Minnesota got the 435th of those seats in 2010. Does anyone know the margin by which we held on to our seat?
It was like 8,000 people, but I don't know what the percent was.
8,739 people. It's a rounding error. It's a rounding error. Had we counted 8,740 fewer people, Missouri would have kept its 9th seat and we would have dropped to 7. Minnesota has had 8 or more representatives in Congress for 100 years. The bad news is we are once again on the bubble. But we're not going down, not on my watch. The good news is that Minnesota generally does very well with respect to the census. We count, we participate at a very high level, just like we vote at a high level. We volunteer at a high level. We donate blood at a high level, right? Like we are civically engaged people. This is what we do. The bad news, in fact, we were number 2 in census participation in 2010. The bad news is, who did we lose to? Wisconsin. I hate losing to Wisconsin, and pretty much all things I hate losing to Wisconsin, and add census to my list of things. So Wisconsin finished about less than 1% higher participation rate than Minnesota, but that's not going to happen this time. So sorry, this is a bit of a seeing eye chart here, but on the right-hand side, you've got your states expected to gain seats, and on your left are the states expecting to lose. You can see Minnesota is expected to lose. It's depending on what which predictions you use. Minnesota's the margin of error could be as little as 10 to 30,000 people. And we maintained our seat by 8,000 last time. So I look at that very positively, which is to say that it's within our reach. We can do that. All right? Census predicts that 17.7% of Minnesotans will not fill out their form on their own. They will not self-respond to the census. That amounts to 965,000 people. It's the second best in the country, and we're going to miss almost 1 million people. But if our margin is about 30,000, that means we need to get about 3% of the population who would otherwise not fill out their form to fill out their form, which is why it's so important what you're doing here in Coon Rapids tonight. Yes, sir?
Would you repeat that again? What percentage will fill out the form?
Was that 82.3%? So 17.7% will not fill out the form on their own. So the good news is we don't have to get them all. We don't have to get them all. We need to get about 3% more that would otherwise not have filled out their form. This may surprise you. Coon Rapids ranks very highly in terms of the number of people that are expected to be missed. Coon Rapids ranks 13th in the state. Raw number, not by percentage of population, raw number, 13th in the state. 9,727 people in Coon Rapids are expected not to fill out the form without some prompting. But, you know, I see the League of Women Voters is involved, so I think we'll be fine. It really is important that you're here. It's really important that you're here and that you're doing this work. It's within our power to save the seat. It's within our power to get Coon Rapids the representation it deserves at all levels, and it's within the power for Coon Rapids to get the financial resources that it deserves as well. Here's what we're talking about. Over $800 billion a year comes from the federal government to state and local governments on the basis of this annual census count. Minnesota gets about $15.5 billion a year for the 55 largest programs. On a per capita basis, that's $2,796 per person per year, or almost $28,000 per person per decade in the state of Minnesota is what we're getting from the federal funds. Now, keep in mind that does not include money that St. Paul also appropriates on the basis of census count. That does not include money that's appropriated from the county on that basis. Doesn't include money that the city of Coon Rapids uses to determine where in Coon Rapids do the investments belong. So that's a very conservative number to say $28,000 per person per year. per person per decade. So, as you may have heard, in fact, I love this. I love the jars in the back to say what method of filling out the form are you going to use? We're going to use the paper version, the phone version, or the internet version. Believe it or not, this is the first time, well, that would be relevant, because in 2010, I say, are you going to fill out via paper? Okay, great. This time, there's a digital census, right? There's this thing called the internet. And you can like buy a car and a house and a vacation and shoes and all this other stuff. Well, now you can actually fill out your form on the internet as well. I think that offers a great opportunity for us, but we also have to keep in mind that it's not a silver bullet, and that there are going to be people who are left behind on the digital divide, either because of age or economics or education level, or I don't have a computer at home, right? People working jobs where they're not sitting in a cubicle and they're not able to work on a computer all day, right? We've got some language issues as well, because the census is not available in all languages. So here's a rough approximation as to when you can expect to hear from the census. So the week of March 12th through 20th, first round of invitations will be going out. 75 to 80% of all households will be receiving a postcard in the mail inviting them to go online and filling out their form. The other 20 to 25% of the households will get a letter saying you will be getting a form. If you don't respond to the postcard, then you get a letter, then you'll get the form, then you'll get another reminder. You can see you get up to 5 different reminders before the Census Bureau will begin sending the enumerators to the doors. So you have till the week of April 20th to 27th before you'll get that final postcard, at which point the Census Bureau will begin knocking on doors. I just want to talk briefly about jobs. So there will be 7,500 jobs with the Census Bureau in the state of Minnesota. The majority of those are going to be door-knocking jobs, and it's essential that we fill these positions. These are good-paying jobs for the federal government. These are part-time jobs. This does not mean you need to quit your day job. These jobs are great for high school students, they're great for college students, they're great for retired people, semi-retired people, stay-at-home parents, someone who's just looking for some side income. I think it's better than driving an Uber. It's what the kids call a side hustle. This is a good side hustle. When I was describing this to a friend of mine about what it is a census taker does, and he says, it kind of sounds like a paid volunteer gig. I said, well, paid volunteer, that's kind of an oxymoron, but I get where he's coming from, because you're getting to do something good for your community, and at the same time you're getting paid to do it. I strongly encourage any of you in this room to do that. The only requirements are you have to be 18, you have to be a citizen, and you do have to have English proficiency. If you have those 3 things, you are eligible. You may be eligible for a position with the Bureau. So 7,500 jobs. It'll take approximately 40,000 applications to fill those jobs. There's only like 80,000 people in the state who are actually looking for work right now. There's like 140,000 job openings. It's going to be very difficult for the Census Bureau to fill these jobs. And in fact, there's an argument to be made to say if you are long-term unemployed, maybe the job with the Census Bureau is not what you're looking for. It's temporary, it doesn't have benefits and such. This is a great job for someone who already has a job. This is a great job for someone who's already volunteering, who's already active in their community, who's already doing various community service projects and helping out their community, who's engaged with their neighborhood block club, or what have you, or an organization like the League. So the census talks about hard to count areas, and I'll be honest, I don't really like the term. I prefer the term historically undercounted. When you say hard to count, it almost sounds like an accusation. You, sir, are hard to count. I think an appropriate response, or someone might say, no, actually, I'm not the problem, you are. When you don't make the census form available in a language that I speak, maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's why I'm not participating in the census, not because I'm not a good person or not because I'm not participating. So these are some of the characteristics which make an area hard to count or historically undercounted. Vacant units, multifamily housing units, aka apartments, Renter-occupied units with more than 1.5 people per room, households where you don't have a husband and wife, so that could be LGBTQ families. It could also just be a bunch of college buddies, all kind of living in a house together, right? Occupied units where you don't have a landline telephone service, if you have adults who do not have a high school diploma, people living below poverty, people receiving public assistance, people who are unemployed, linguistically isolated households. That means that it's a household where you don't have someone over the age of 14 who speaks English very well. That's a self-reported number. Census is available in 13 languages, English and 12 others, which is great if you speak Spanish or German or Russian or Portuguese or French or Mandarin or Korean. Somali and Hmong are not included. Somali and Hmong are not included because the Census Bureau does its languages on the basis of prevalence nationally. And Somali and Hmong, while prevalent here in Minnesota, is not prevalent nationally, therefore it's not available, whether you call it in, whether you go with the paper form, or whether you go online. You cannot get it in Somali or Hmong. We, the state, are trying to supplement that ourselves, but ultimately the form itself, there's nothing we can do about the form. We can provide language guides to folks, we can provide that to our community partners, but ultimately the form itself is still not available in Somali or Hmong. So, what can you do to help? Well, you're doing number one right now, which is educating, you're being educated about the 2020 census, and now you can take this information and you can educate others. Our website, the Minnesota 2020 Census website, which is part of the Department of Administration and the State Demographer's Office, we've got a couple of videos that we've created already with TPT television. First two are out. Well, there's like a Census 101 and a 102 video. We just filmed a video aimed at college students last week. And the next video is going to be done is actually an animated video. It's going to address the questions of confidentiality and the citizenship question. The 101 and 102 videos are also going to be reshot with a Spanish family, a Somali family, and a Hmong family. So instead of seeing this beautiful face and hearing Somali or Hmong, or seeing a teletype in Hmong under me, you actually hear in language for someone speaking Somali, Spanish, or Hmong, explaining the importance of the census. And then the question about citizenship and confidentiality is one where we will also have voice actors in Spanish, Somali, and Hmong voicing the roles, and we'll provide the video to any other interested parties. So Matt had mentioned that some of the material that you're creating are looking to create in Arabic. That's something that we'd be able to provide to you if someone wished to overdub that, share that via their social media platforms or cable access, they would be able to do so. Volunteer for your local complete count committee. Very strongly suggest that. You can do that on the city level. You could do that on a block level. If there isn't a complete count committee in your area, in your neighborhood, in your locality, you may form one. City of Coon Rapids does a great job making the space like this available for a meeting or a subcommittee. But churches, schools, mosque, any other faith organization are also a great place for meetings or subcommittees to happen. You can make sure that other people, make sure, of course, yourself, that you fill out your form, your family members fill out their forms, make sure your neighbors do so, and other people in your social circle. You know, what I love about the League of Women Voters is, although I might not know the specific woman at the grocery store who's registering people to vote, I do recognize the League of Women Voters, and I do trust that name, and I see that and I say, I can register to vote with these people. I trust that my registration will be in. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for the League of Women Voters to do the same. You can take a look at the map that we've shared with Matt. Find out where in Coon Rapids are going to be the areas where the response is expected to be the lowest. And you can go to Rainbow Foods, you can go to Cub Foods, you have the same conversation with the manager there that you do when you're doing registering to vote, and you can set up a table. Beautiful thing about this digital census is it gives you the ability to be able to help people fill it out. If you've got a laptop, if you've got a tablet, if you've got frankly, if you just got a phone that's got the internet on it, you can help people fill out their census form right there. So. Sorry, I skipped over the jobs. The only way to apply is via the census's website, www.2020census.gov/jobs. We spoke with some folks from the census 2 weeks ago at the Minnesota State Fair, and they told us that the Chicago region is second to last in as far as filling these jobs. Owing to a very strong economy, it's the reason why they're having such a difficult time. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Again, my name is Matt Brown. I'm Economic Development Coordinator for the City of Coon Rapids. I wanted to talk just very briefly before we go into our panel discussion about what the city has been doing so far and what some of our ideas about outreach related to the 2020 census are. So first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're trying to be a little more proactive at the local level. Andrew had mentioned last time around in 2010, Minnesota was number 2 in the country in terms of its participation in the census. Only Wisconsin had a higher response rate. So you can see the map on the screen right now shows a county level map of the whole country. So the darker shaded counties are those with the higher response rates. And you can really see in the Twin Cities area, really most of Minnesota, most of Wisconsin, we had some of the highest response rates in the country. When we drill down though to Coon Rapids, we can kind of see some changes between 2000 and 2010. So in the 2000 census, 89% of households in Coon Rapids responded on their own. That is, they mailed back the form. They didn't require an outreach worker to come to their home to be counted. By 2010, that dropped to about 83%. So that's pretty notable. In Anoka County, it was 88% in 2000, down to 84% in 2010. Statewide, though, it was 81% in both years. So there was certainly a change in this part of the state. The statewide level, the response rate held pretty steady. And this map comes from another tool on the Census Bureau's website. We drilled down a little bit further into a few specific census tracts. So one there on the screen, kind of at the right side, I know there aren't a lot of labels on that map, but basically that light shaded area, the eastern boundary of that is University Avenue, kind of in the southeast corner of Coon Rapids, down by Northtown Mall. In that particular area, we had a response rate in 2000 of 86%. By 2010, that dropped to 76%. So that's a pretty substantial drop in that particular census tract. And that was something we saw really throughout this part of the region. Looking at it in a different way, the Census Bureau uses a term called low response score in that particular tract, as well as some others in Coon Rapids and the surrounding area were identified. You can see some of the demographics of that census tract. So, for instance, 14% of the people in that tract were foreign born. 48% of the housing units are renter occupied. 32% of the population moved within the last year. So again, when Andrew was talking about the historically undercounted populations, those populations that move around a lot, are more mobile, those that maybe have a language barrier, those who rent versus own tend to be in those categories of historically undercounted populations. And part of the reason for this, and Coon Rapids isn't alone, but 20 years ago, a lot of the suburban areas in Minnesota were just more homogeneous, and we've seen a lot of demographic changes throughout the suburbs. So it's not a surprise we've seen some changes like this in Coon Rapids. So I want to talk a little bit about why the census matters for Coon Rapids, and Andrew touched on some of this, so I won't go into a lot of detail. At the state and local level, obviously at the congressional level, statewide, it's very important, but at the state level, it's important too. Coon Rapids is a relatively large city, and it's important that we have the number of state representatives that we should. I know not too long ago, Coon Rapids was, I think, the largest city in the state that didn't have a state legislator who lived in the city. Now that's certainly not the case, but I don't think that's something we would really work toward. We want to have the right level of representation at the state level. It also matters at the county level, as county commissioner districts are, as new boundaries are drawn for those districts after the census. It's important that we have the correct level of representation. Transportation is another topic at the local level that's really important. Obviously, some of the improvements that are coming to the Highway 10 corridor are a direct response of local advocacy around those. And in order to really make the case for those transportation improvements, we have to have accurate data for how many people live in this area, and that data is used for projecting the population into the future. So we can really justify making sure those transportation investments are made in this part of the region. It's important for local government decisions to at the local level. We apply for a lot of federal funds for various programs and services, so those are oftentimes based on our population. Also, for business decisions, census information is very important. As an economic development person, I'm often asked about why Coon Rapids does or doesn't have a particular business, or there's maybe a chain business that people really want to see here. Especially for national retailers, their locational decisions are really based on strict demographics. So by having that level of information, we're, I think, in a better position to attract more businesses. Now, briefly, a little bit about some of our outreach efforts. Now, in the past, in 2000 and 2010, at the local level, we really didn't do anything to do outreach in city government. And in 2000, certainly, our participation rate was very high, so maybe we didn't need to back then. I think 2010 was maybe a little bit more of a wake-up call. We had helped with identifying addresses and making sure the Census Bureau had the information it needed, but beyond that, we didn't do a lot to promote the census. So this time around, we're using all of our city communication channels to really get the word out. We have our marble voting activity at the back of the room. We brought that to a number of meetings over the summer, including the multicultural Night to Unite event. So that was a huge opportunity to really draw people in who might not otherwise interface with city government, and let them know about the census. We're also using our newsletter, website, cable TV to really get the word out. We've translated some of our materials in Spanish and Arabic so far. We're also talking about the possibility of having a computer kiosk at City Hall so people can come in and fill out their form online. Now, in the previous slide, I mentioned we have a lot of different communication channels. Unfortunately, most of those channels are really reaching, or they do the best job at reaching people who would respond to the census anyway and don't need that initial outreach. It's still important that we do that, but a very high percentage of them are the ones who would go online and fill out their forms. So a lot of our targeted efforts are geared toward those undercounted populations. So one thing we've been doing is beginning to identify and meet with some of the leaders in various faith organizations that have significant numbers of people of color. We feel that finding those people who can really influence people in those communities to really be advocates and explain the importance is going to be huge for us. We're also identifying some businesses to house our materials. We're trying to reach apartment residents, highly mobile youth, working with our community service officers and others who interact with some of those populations. We're also trying to coordinate with the Anoka County Libraries. I know they're interested in forming their own complete count committee as well, so they know that people from all walks of life use the libraries, so that's a huge opportunity for people to get the word out to people. And then briefly, and we can talk a little bit more about this in our next discussion, but we're certainly interested in all of your help. We have a sign-up sheet in back. People can certainly call or email me if they're interested in doing something. I will say that outreach efforts, and this isn't unique to Coon Rapids, but I think around the state, aren't going to have a lot of structure. It's really a matter of making the right connections with the right people. So certainly if any of you have strong personal relationships with anyone who has close ties to those harder to count or historically undercounted communities, we're interested in having you help as a volunteer to make those connections. And of course, another plug for working for the census. Again, at the local level, the more people we have in those positions who can relate to people who live in Coon Rapids and relate to our various communities, I think will result in a more accurate count. So that's all I have. I'll turn things back over to Gretchen.
So with that, we're going to take a short break while we reconfigure for the panel discussion. Thank you very much. Send your questions to the aisle and we'll get them from you. Thank you.
Want to know the who, what, when, and where of Coon Rapids? Then just follow CTN on social media. It's that simple. Whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Keep up with local news, sports, and events, and the people who make our community such a great place to live. So give us a follow, like, share, or subscribe, and always be the first to know what's up in Coon Rapids. That's CTN, helping you stay connected.
Well, welcome back. Thank you. You can see that we now have assembled our panel up here on the dais, and we're going to ask our two new panel members to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with the questions. Amir, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name is Amir Malik. I'm a civil rights attorney. I live in Blaine.
And Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Tingelstad. I'm a former state legislator, and I've been involved with the census in various ways over the past decades, and I live in Coon Rapids.
Thank you. So like I said, we have questions that we pre-prepared, and there's also questions from the audience. So I'm going to be sorting the audience questions, and we'll try to group them together so that we can get as many in as possible. But I'm going to start with a couple of the pre-prepared ones here, and they're kind of more things for Andrew, and I see them reflected in the others too. Andrew, people want to know, will the Census Forum be available in language other than English? You covered that. But what about blind, hearing impaired, and people that have other kinds of disabilities?
That's an excellent question. As I understand, there is an ASL aid for the form, but I'm not exactly sure what form that takes. Census workers have, so although the forms themselves are available only in 13 languages all told, census workers do have what are known as language guides, and the language guides have some 50 or so languages on those.
Oh, okay.
And so a census worker, if they're not able to communicate with someone, can show someone a language guide, and the language guide will say, in 50-some languages, I'm with the census, which language do you speak? You point to the language you speak, they write down number 26, and they go back to the office and say, does anyone speak Hungarian? Anyone speak Romanian, right? And then they'll try to get someone who's able to speak the language. So, as I understand, that is one of the ways that that ASL is handled.
Well, thank you. Is the information, another one for Andrew and Amir, is the information provided confidential? Now, Andrew talked about that. It is confidential. Do people have to put their name on the form, though?
So the name is one of the questions on the form, although it is not a mandatory question.
Okay.
So it's possible for someone to fill out the form and not answer their name. I will say this, that the more questions you answer, the less likelihood that someone might come and knock at your door. Mm-hmm. Although there's a certain number of questions which are considered to be mandatory, you must fill out those questions in order for the questionnaire to be counted. Filling out that minimum number of questions is not enough to not have someone knock at your door.
Okay.
So if for whatever reason you don't want to talk to the landlord, you're concerned with the government, simply answering the minimum number of questions is not going to do the thing that you want, which is to deter people from actually knocking at your door.
So I was going to ask Amir then, so if people are concerned about privacy, how would you recommend they respond to the census?
I think in this case, you trust the system. I mean, the census has been going on for a long time. The penalties are harsh.
For breaking confidentiality?
Yes, for breaking confidentiality, and they don't share it even between agencies. So it's not even about your information being passed on to local authorities. They don't even pass information between each other.
Okay.
I just wanted to second that. Two census workers working together can't share that information. If Amir and I were both working for the Census Bureau and we're knocking in an apartment together, and I was on the right side of the hallway and he was on the left side of the hallway, and oh, Amir, you'll never believe, oh, never mind, I can't say anything. Amir can't tell me what he just saw, and I can't tell Amir what I just saw. So Census Bureau takes it very seriously, and that confidentiality even applies within individual census workers, let alone with outside agencies.
Okay, thank you. Where do snowbirds or others that are mobile and don't have a permanent address respond? That's an Andrew question, I think.
So the legal standard is, where do you spend the majority of your time? Where are you a usual resident? So although someone might be in Florida on April 1, that does not necessarily mean to say that they are Floridian. They are Floridian if they spend 6 months and a day in Florida. So snowbirds, which is not a small problem here in Minnesota, some 44,000 snowbirds. What we're not able to tell is how many of them do, in fact, live outside of the state for 6 months and a day, and those, like my aunt and uncle, who simply flee because of our lovely our lovely weather. So trying to get in front of the snowbirds before they leave is helpful. Kind of a rule of thumb I use is to say, okay, who do you cheer for in sports? I mean, are you a Twins fan? Or are you a Tampa Bay Devil Rays fan? See, that's a trick question, because no one's a Tampa Bay Devil Rays fan. So I think it's a good way to look at it. I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to lie. I just say follow your heart. If you live in Minnesota, the majority of the time you should fill out your form as a Minnesotan. Do you tell people if you go on a cruise, I'm from Coon Rapids, or I'm from, I don't know, Sunshine Village, Arizona? Right? I'm from Coon Rapids, right? So then fill out your form accordingly.
A related question. So you showed us the list of dates, and people are going to be getting the invitation to fill out the online form before April 1st. So you can actually fill out the form in advance and
Absolutely.
say, on April 1st, I will be here.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. So the citizenship question, you talked about that. I think that there's myths that we're going to need to work at dispelling, though, and so that'll be an Andrew and Amir kind of question, I think. So whoever wants to start.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, the citizenship has been pushed a lot, even after the Supreme Court made its decision. The Trump administration had said they were going to try to get the question, and even though printing had already started, this is there. But in the end, we now know the citizenship question is not going to be there. And on all of these, you just have to go with what's in front of you. What's in front is this question's not there, and it's not going to be there.
Anything to add to that, Andrew?
I'll second that. I mean, there is an awful lot of fear out there right now. And, we talked about the possibility of a citizenship question for some 15 months. And then it fizzled out pretty quietly. Unfortunately, the sense of the citizenship question being removed from the questionnaire did not get the same fanfare as the addition of the question or the possibility of adding it for 15 months had. So that's I think a good place for us to be spending the next 205 days in educating people on the importance of it, and emphasizing the safety and security of it, and really this is how we're counted. This is information is not released for 72 years, so in 2012 you could get the 1940 census. Building I live in was built in 1916, so I can look up in the census who lived in my place in 1920, who lived there in 1930, who lived there in 1940. And I've heard among some immigrant groups that this is how we're going to be counted. And when our grandchildren ask many years from now, where did Grandma and Grandpa live when they first came to Minnesota? If we don't fill out our form, then we'll never know. Maybe that gets lost in family lore and family history. I don't know. It was somewhere around Coon Rapids. But they don't know. No, it's that house right there. That's where Grandma and Grandpa met. That's where Mom was born. That's where Dad was born. So I hope that that's helpful and persuasive.
So Kathy, based on your experience in the state legislature, what does the inaccurate count matter for redistricting, and how would it affect state funding at the local level?
Well, it's basically very important. It involves nearly everything at the state legislature. And through the years, I've been involved in a variety of ways, and I served on the Legislative Redistricting Committee in 2001 at the state legislature. But, you know, I listened to Andrew's presentation with interest because in 1980 and 1990, I was an enumerator and actually one of those people that went door to door, and I had a piece of swag left over from that earlier census. They would give out free pens and other things that would say information about remembering to fill out your census form. But in 2001, we worked on redistricting at the Capitol, and it's based on every 10 years, each of the congressional districts, and then it goes to the legislative districts as well, they all need to have equal population. And it has to be within about a 1% percentage rate. So you know, as people move around the state, the geographical boundaries of those areas change. And it's always something that's very controversial at the Capitol. In fact, the last several decades, the bill that the legislature has approved and went to the governor actually ended up getting vetoed, so the Supreme Court had to deal with the final redistricting and provide that information actually the next year. So for this 2020 census, the legislature will do the bulk of their work in 2021, and it'll affect the elections that occur in 2022. So if it goes to a three-judge panel again with the Supreme Court, probably most people won't know about those districts until early 2022. And so it doesn't give a lot of time for candidates, you know, who are in the legislature or thinking about running for office. But it is so important, you know, as Andrew mentioned, with that 8th congressional district, and do we miss it or not? And when it was mentioned that in Coon Rapids here, we could potentially miss 9,000 people being counted here, and then you said the difference of the last congressional seat was like 8,700 some. And so you see just here in Coon Rapids, by making sure that we don't have an undercount, that could actually help to make the difference statewide for us being able to, you know, keep that 8th congressional district. And we all know how important that is when it comes to federal funding, and so much of the federal funding affects the state funding. And then also I served on the bonding committee, so when we look at population areas around the state, those state dollars that go to the local communities are also based on population. So again, it's just so very important.
Thank you.
If I could add just one thing. So in 2010, following the census, so two zip codes in Minneapolis you may be familiar with, 55411 and 55412, basically starting at around the Hawthorne neighborhood at where Hiawatha, where Highway 55 is, and on north. So the two zip codes are 55411 and 55412. Per the census between the year 2000 and 2010, those two zip codes lost 7,123 people. Well, here's a real implication of what happened. North Minneapolis used to have 3 city council members. Following the 2010 census, the number dropped to 2, which meant diminished political power for people living in North Minneapolis, which meant that it was difficult for, you know, when a move was made to close North High School, it was on the basis of, well, gosh, no one lives in that neighborhood anymore. Why are we boosting up the school? Or when the Met Council is making decisions about, hey, where should we put the high-speed bus lines? What do we do? You know, it's hard to prove a negative, but when you know, decisions are being made about, you know, where the next CVS should be, and these are not only jobs for people in the neighborhood, but also might mean it's a prescription that you can walk and get, and not have to get on a bus in order to be able to go pick it up. So some very real implications of getting it wrong.
That kind of segues us into this question for Amir. So as a civil rights attorney, Amir, what does an accurate count mean for communities of color?
Well, if you're not counted, you don't matter. In the 2000 census, for example, African-American children were undercount by 8%. And children in general in the census is harder to count. There is an undercount. But for non-Hispanic white children, the undercount was 3%. So in 2010, again, African-American children were undercounted at twice the rate of non-Hispanic white children. So on these, when you're trying to decide what resources should go there, if you're not counted, which is a real problem in the minority communities, then those resources, those programs, when it comes to things that you're going to, services for that would be useful for the children when it comes to, from the schools, from recreation, anything is not going to be listed. So it is a huge problem. Minority communities and leaders in those communities need to get people to understand the importance of it, because it's not something where we're just saying, oh, it could happen. Census after census, there's been a significant undercount for minority communities. On the other side, for many affluent white communities, there's been an overcount. So those exacerbate the issue.
I'll give you an example. According to the census, there's 48,000 Somalis in Minnesota. 48,000. My Somali friends tell me 48,000 is I had that many in my birthday party last year. and they're like, and I only invited my friends from Minneapolis. So the fact of the matter is that when I talk about the census with my friends in the Somali community, and I explain to them, well, according to the census, there's only 48,000 Somalis. I say, well, God, that makes sense why I have to wait 3 hours for a translator at Hennepin Health. Maybe that explains why there are not enough translators at the school for the parent-teacher night. The government doesn't even know we're here, right? And so that's a good example, but your point is very well taken.
But I also think on, giving attention to a group, if you feel they don't exist, then you don't have to account for them. If you're in government, the way you speak about a group, if you think they're small versus large, you're able to, you just don't have to, people respect numbers. And if they don't think the numbers are there, they don't many times, unfortunately, feel the need to respect that group.
Thanks. Kathy, the school district a little bit. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the school district and how school district uses those numbers as well.
Yes, actually, the school district does a great job of tracking students. Obviously, they need to know how many classrooms to have each year, especially the incoming kindergartners. And I think Anoka Hennepin does a great job of estimating. Usually, they're only off by like less than 0.1%. So they're really watching the community during the 10 years between each of the 10-year census, and that really, determines the entire budget for the school district, because it's based on per pupil. And so it is very important that there's some accurate numbers there.
So Matt, we had some questions about, you had your excellent slides there. Your last slide talked about what community members can do, but I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit more about that. If people here in the audience or at home want to get in touch with you, would that be a way to go?
Yeah, certainly that's a place to start. I do have a sign-up sheet in the back of the room, and anyone watching the video can contact me by email or by phone, and let me know if you're interested in joining our outreach group. I would say too, complete count committees don't have to just be at the government level. Other organizations or entities can form a complete count committee. So if you have a group of people who is interested in doing some very targeted outreach, have some specific ideas, we're happy to have you connected or involved in our group. But if you want to go out on your own and do some things too, that's great. As I mentioned before, our efforts are going to really be focused on reaching some of our undercounted communities. So if any of you have personal connections to some of those groups where we can really get the word out and help people hear from someone they trust. A lot of times people who work in government, even at local government, where people might have a better impression of local government than maybe state or federal government, but even so, we're not the best people to connect with all communities. It's effective for some, but not all. So we really would like a variety of people and help make those connections.
Yeah, we had a number of questions from the audience about the homeless population and how we're intending to reach homeless people. And we also had one about nursing homes. So if you could let us know what the plan is for those, at least in Coon Rapids or...
Yeah, nursing homes I think are a little, at least of those two, are easier since everyone's kind of in one place. It's relatively
Who's
easy
responsible
to
for filling out the form? Does it go to each individual person in the
It
in the
depend-
home?
I believe it depends on on their level of independence.
Oh,
So
okay.
whether you're independent living, it's a memory care facility, assisted living, et cetera.
So one might go to the administrator in one kind of facility, in another case it would go to each individual addressee?
Correct. The Census Bureau has an operation known as group quarters, and so that includes, that might include a nursing home, let's say, kids living in a dorm.
Okay.
It might include people who are guests of the state, say at Stillwater or St. Cloud.
Yeah.
Guests. It's
Yeah.
nice. It's a nice euphemism. But people experiencing homelessness are very, very challenging for lots of
Yeah.
reasons. Because there are those who are sheltered and those who are not. Those who are sheltered are easier, relatively speaking, because Census Bureau has relationships with, say, the Salvation Army downtown or the Dorothy Day Center in downtown St. Paul, and so they have a relationship with them to get a head count. But the people who are problematic are those who might be unsheltered. Either they're actually sleeping outside, or they're sleeping in their car at a rest stop, or couch surfing, as they say. Amira mentioned children are a huge issue. There's some 350,000 kids under 5 in Minnesota, and they are at risk of being missed. Interestingly, 80% of all kids who are under 5 live in households where the form was completed. And when I first heard that, I thought maybe this was like a Home Alone situation. The family went off on vacation and little Kevin's left at home, right? But that's not the case. And it's families experiencing homelessness. It might be a child is staying with grandparents. It could be the child's in a family of divorce, and maybe splitting their time between the parents, and neither happen to put the child down on their own form. So. People experiencing homelessness are very difficult. Those who are unsheltered, the Census Bureau has one night, same night for the whole country, April 1st.
Okay.
Census Bureau workers put on their reflective vests and they go out. Yeah, but if they don't find you that one night, chances are you'll be missed.
Let's see. How would census workers be identified when they come to your door?
So Census Bureau workers will have a badge that has their face on it. I believe Matt has some information that we had sent him with what that actually looks like. There's a phone number to call. There's even a website. So if someone asks you for information, census, say I'm here with the census, and I don't know, something doesn't look right, they should have a badge. They'll have probably a computer that'll have the logo on it and such. But if for whatever reason you have any concerns, you may ask them for their name and their badge number, and then you can call this number, or you can go online and you can find out if they are in fact a census worker.
I think we're going to wrap up the video section now. Is there anything anybody else wants to say as a parting shot or a last thought, Kathy?
I'll throw something out there, and perhaps it's through Matt here. This is for Coon Rapids, but we understand that right now Blaine does not have a group like this that's going on, so we throw out a challenge to Blaine. And looking at it from the Anoka County perspective, there's always been a competition between the city of Coon Rapids and the city of Blaine about which one has a bigger population. Mainly it's been Coon Rapids, but the last several years it's been Blaine. And so we're going to hope to make sure and get our underpopulation counted, and maybe we will cross over and have more than Blaine this time. So there's the challenge.
So it's now time to wrap up. I want to thank our excellent panelists for sharing their time and knowledge with us tonight. Remember, it's up to all of us to build our democracy and keep it strong. Thanks to our audience and viewers for taking time to learn more about the census.